Carol Burnett made millions laugh for 11 years straight, becoming a household name and comedy icon. But in 1977, she did something that made her entire crew cry. That particular episode aired only once and left a lasting impression. Viewers were stunned, hearts were broken, and critics hailed it as brilliant. Awards poured in, cementing its legacy as a television landmark. But Carol herself never watched it again. Not once in 47 years. It was too real, she said. The sketch struck a nerve so deep she couldn't bear to face it. For a woman known for laughter, this moment of raw pain revealed the depth behind the smile. But to understand what made America's funniest woman refuse to re-watch her own performance, you have to start at the beginning. Carol Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas, into a life marked by instability and heartbreak. From the start, pain was woven into her days. Her parents were alcoholics, emotionally absent and incapable of caring for her. Her father, a movie theater manager, couldn't keep steady work. Her mother drank heavily and never provided the nurturing presence a child needs. Both eventually died from alcohol-related illnesses. By the time Carol was a toddler, she'd already felt the sting of abandonment. The people who were supposed to love her the most had chosen bottles over bedtime stories. Her early world was a place of silence, chaos, and loneliness. But she learned early on that laughter could act as a shield, a way to survive when everything else felt broken. When her parents finally gave up trying to raise her, Carol was taken in by her maternal grandmother, Mabel White. In 1940, they moved to Hollywood, chasing not fame, but survival. They found themselves living in a single, cramped room in a dilapidated boarding house. Their neighbors were society's castaways, addicts, the mentally ill, and other struggling souls barely surviving on welfare. Carol and her grandmother subsisted on $20 a week, not even enough for consistent meals, much less dreams. But what Mabel lacked in wealth, she made up for with unconditional love, something Carol had never known before. She was poor, yes, but finally felt safe. Amid this hardship, Carol invented a fantasy world. She created a fictional twin sister named Karen, who was everything Carol wished she could be. Confident, beautiful, always cheerful. She committed to the illusion so intensely that even the boarding house tenants believed Karen existed. Carol would run up the fire escape, change clothes and hair, then reappear as her twin, radiating charisma and joy. Moments later, she transformed back into Carol. These people, many of whom were barely holding on, welcomed the illusion because they, too, needed something to believe in. The brilliance of her future performance career was already flickering, even in that rundown building. Some escapes were rooted in imagination, but others came from the silver screen. Every Saturday, Carol and her grandmother would spend 25 cents, more than 10% of their weekly income, on movie tickets. For a few hours, she was transported to a world of order, beauty, and music. Stars danced, people fell in love, and life felt safe. Then the credits rolled, and the peeling paint, hunger, and fear returned. They couldn't afford toilet paper, so they quietly stole it from the theater bathrooms. They weren't embarrassed, they were desperate. Even at just 7 years old, Carol knew hunger not just of the stomach, but of the soul. One day, while watching a film, she heard Johnny Weissmuller's famous Tarzan yell echo through the theater. That yell hit her like a thunderbolt. At home, she practiced it obsessively, mimicking every pitch and rhythm until it became perfect. What she didn't know was that she was training her voice, mastering the kind of breath control professional singers work for years to achieve. That yell became part of her comedic arsenal later, a signature moment that brought audiences to their feet in laughter. It was born not on stage, but in the poverty-stricken shadows of her childhood. By the time Carol finished high school, she wanted to be a journalist, fulfilling her mother's abandoned dream of becoming a writer. She was accepted into UCLA, but when enrollment time came, she realized she couldn't afford the $50 tuition fee, about $600 today. Her dream was slipping away. But then something unexplainable happened. A stranger, whose identity she never discovered, paid the tuition with no explanation and no strings attached. It was enough to change everything. She enrolled at UCLA, planning to study journalism. But one elective theater class transformed her life. In that class, she felt something she'd never experienced before: freedom. She wasn't invisible or afraid. She was alive, bold, hilarious, and commanding. Her professors noticed it. So did her peers. She could sing, act, and make people laugh all in the same breath. Journalism suddenly felt too small. She switched majors. That decision, terrifying at the time, was her first real act of courage. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was dreaming. Her instincts were right. By the end of her first year, she was named UCLA's most promising newcomer in the theater program, a title that became prophecy. With that momentum, doors began to open, doors that would lead her far beyond what she ever imagined. In 1954, another twist of fate arrived at a San Diego party. She wasn't a guest. She was sneaking hors d'oeuvres into her purse to feed her grandmother. A well-dressed stranger approached her. He wasn't from Hollywood. He was a millionaire shipbuilder from La Jolla. She told him she dreamed of going to New York to make it on Broadway, but couldn't even afford tuition. He offered $1,000 to her and $1,000 to her boyfriend, Don Soroyan, under 3 rules. Never reveal his name, only use the money for their dream, and help others if they succeeded. The offer seemed unreal, but it was real. With $2,000 in hand, they packed their bags and left UCLA. Carol had never been further than Texas, but she didn't care. "I didn't know enough to be scared," she later said. They arrived in New York and checked into the Algonquin Hotel, $9 a night, far too expensive. The money began to dwindle. She nearly gave up. Then she heard a radio announcement. A hurricane named Carol was heading up the coast. She took it as a sign. She stayed. They moved into the rehearsal club, a boarding house for aspiring actresses. 4 girls per room, 1 bathroom, 1 closet. To Carol, it was heaven. She worked nights as a hat-check girl and auditioned during the day. In 1955, she performed in the rehearsal club review. Agents and producers, including Marlene Dietrich, attended. Her breakout moment came when she sang a parody love song about John Foster dolls. So ridiculous, yet she nailed it. Audiences loved it. She was invited to appear on the Jack Pa Show, and then the Ed Sullivan Show, where she shook with nerves but won over the crowd. More opportunities followed. She starred in Once Upon a Mattress, earning her first Tony nomination. 5 years after that anonymous gift, she and Don paid back every penny. The benefactor never responded. But Carol had made it. She was earning $500 a week. Then came The Gary Moore Show. From 1959 to 1962, Carol became a television powerhouse. She won her first Emmy in 1962. Her character work, especially her iconic cleaning lady, became beloved. That show also shaped her comedic voice and timing, inspiring what would become her own variety show. When CBS was hesitant about letting her do a special with Julie Andrews, fate intervened again. Executives saw her struggling to get a cab and joked that a truck driver might help. One actually did. The special, Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall, won major awards and was a critical success. But it was only a preview of what would come next. On September 11, 1967, the Carol Burnett Show premiered. It redefined television. With 30 million weekly viewers over 11 seasons, it became one of the most beloved variety shows in TV history, winning 25 primetime Emmys. Carol became the first woman to lead such a show, breaking barriers in a male-dominated industry. Her work inspired Saturday Night Live and generations of women in comedy. Behind the curtain, however, there were battles. Harvey Korman nearly walked off the show in season 7. Carol fired him after a backstage blow-up, but he returned Monday morning skipping and whistling, as she'd requested. Tim Conway brought chaos and brilliance, saving his best material for live tapings, making every sketch unpredictable. One infamous sketch, The Elephant Story, left the entire cast, even Vicki Lawrence, in stitches. But not all sketches were funny. In 1977, Carol played Eunice in a deeply serious episode of The Family. There were no jokes, only heartbreak. When the camera panned out on her tear-streaked face in silence, it stunned viewers. Carol never watched the episode again. It was too real, she said. That pain came from lived experience. The rest of Carol's life was filled with personal loss and private battles. Her first marriage to Don Soroyan ended as his Broadway dreams faded and grief consumed him. He died in 1990. Her second marriage to producer Joe Hamilton gave her 3 daughters but also fell apart under pressure. She sued the National Enquirer for libel, fought a brutal court case, and changed tabloid law. Her daughter Carrie's drug addiction nearly destroyed them. At 13, Carrie was lost in cocaine and pills. Rehab followed. They didn't speak for a year, but eventually, they reunited and co-wrote Hollywood Arms, based on Carol's life. Carrie died of cancer at just 38, 2 months after Carol's marriage to Brian Miller, her rock through the storm. When Carol's youngest daughter Erin faced addiction and lost custody of her son, Carol stepped in again. At 87, she became guardian of her grandson, choosing love over comfort. Even in her 80s and 90s, Carol wasn't finished. She appeared in Better Call Saul at 89, stunning critics. She voiced characters in animated films like Horton Hears a Who, introducing herself to new generations. She returned to Broadway, to television, and finally, at 91, earned another Emmy nomination for Palm Royal. Through it all, Carol Burnett remained not just a comedy icon, but a symbol of resilience. Her life wasn't just laughter, it was grief, love, grit, and brilliance. She didn't just survive. She transformed pain into art, heartbreak into humor, and hardship into joy. Carol Burnett didn't just make people laugh. She gave them hope.